hope this goth phase ends soon.
Lisa Frankenstein is the newest comedy movie to hit theaters, and it's directed by Zelda Williams. Zelda is the daughter of the late, great Robin Williams, and I thought that was a pretty cool fact. Didn't know she was in the movie business, let alone directing a movie that I was going to see. So when I found that out after the fact, figured I'd throw it in this review and let you guys know. Well, with that said, Lisa Frankenstein is a movie about a girl named Lisa who is played by Kathryn Newton, and Kathryn Newton is from the movie Freaky. If you guys haven't seen that, you need to. It stars her opposite of Vince Vaughn in a body swap Freaky Friday style movie, but also 80s slasher horror movie that you just need to see. It's a great film. But when I heard Kathryn Newton in it, that's what I thought about. That got me excited. But she plays this character of Lisa who goes through life who's just not accepted by people in her life, whether it's kids at school, adults in her life. Her mother was killed by a home intruder, and so her dad remarried to a woman that's not very nice to her. And while that woman has a teenage daughter that is nice to her, she still doesn't feel like she fits in with her. So most of the time she spends her time in the local cemetery that has a grave of someone who died a long time ago. There's a statue of him built, and she just idolizes this guy. And one day she accidentally wishes him to come to life. And when he does come to life, she then goes on sort of a love story adventure with this Frankenstein style monster who she has to piece together, whether it's his ear that's missing, his hand that's missing, and they try to throw in comedy along the way. Now, if that sounds interesting, Lisa Frankenstein is playing in theaters right now, and it might be a movie for you. With that said, let's get into my positives and some of my negatives. The first positive I have for this movie is going to be the set look of the 80s. The movie is framed around the 80s, and so the sets have to look legit, the people have to look legit, people have to talk that way, and it all really worked for me. I thought that they did a great job with, again, the sets that were built, the way people looked in this movie, the way they talked to each other, the cars in this movie, everything seemed like it was in that time capsule of the 80s, and that worked for me. I liked that look, the style of the movie. It also had a very Tim Burton style look, and I don't know if that was on purpose, if they were also paying tribute to sort of movies that came out in that time. The movie has a very Edward Scissorhands style to it, and so again, Tim Burton style. I like that. I thought it looked good, and if they were paying tribute, I think they paid it off very well. My other positive for this movie has to be the soundtrack. Again, since the movie takes place in the 80s, most of the soundtrack is going to be surrounded by 80s music, and again, when I'm sitting there watching the movie, the soundtrack worked for me. Anytime a song came on, it worked for me. I was having an enjoyable time. With that said, though, that's where my positives end. We have to get into my negatives. For negatives in this movie, I have to start with the storyline. So I already gave you the basic setup for this movie, but unfortunately the movie doesn't give you much more after that. She's going on this sort of love story, romance, adventure trip with this Frankenstein monster, and he'll kill someone, and then they'll bury the body, but before they do, they'll take a piece of that body and sew it onto this new Frankenstein monster, and then it's just sort of wash, rinse, repeat. And are there different situations for each person? Sure, but none of them are really compelling. None of them are really satisfying. There's no one in this movie, in my opinion, that gets killed where you're like, oh, that person deserved to die, because that at least would have made it more exciting for you, the viewer. You'd be like, okay, where's the Frankenstein monster? He needs to kill them, and then when he takes their body part, it'll be satisfying for the viewer. But instead, it was just like, oh, it's this person, and I won't spoil it, but it's this person who didn't necessarily need to die. They may not have been the best character in the movie, but they didn't deserve to die. And then they'll just bring in a random character like, oh, you know, this boy I had a crush on, we'll just bring him to the woods, but we've never talked about him before, so there's no real stakes. You know he's going out there to get killed, and again, it's just wash, rinse, repeat, the same cycle until the Frankenstein monster is put together by the end of this movie. My other negative for this movie is that it just didn't work for me, and that's just on me. So it's a negative that I have that may not resonate with the rest of you. The reason this movie didn't really work for me is I didn't find it particularly funny, scary, or freaky, and those are the three things that I was hoping to get out of this movie. It's a movie called Lisa Frankenstein, so while it might be a comedy, billed as a comedy, the previews look like it's going to be quirky, a little bit of scary would have been nice, but they didn't go down that horror route at all. So you take that out and you're like, all right, well, give me some comedy and then just give me some really messed up freaky moments. But you don't really get that either. You get some jokes throughout, but nothing that's like laugh out loud, in my opinion. And the other one person in the movie theater that saw this movie didn't find it funny either. They just sat there like, you know, like me the whole time, just watching the movie. Like, it's not funny. Those jokes just, they're not landing the way that the director wanted them to land. They're just not landing, at least for me and the other person that was in the theater. And I keep doing this because they were down like 4 or 5 rows. I just felt like it was important for you to know that. But finally, I'm like, okay, well, at least be freaky and kind of gnarly with some of the kills that you do. And yeah, they're cutting off body parts of people, and so that could have gone the extreme route where it's like, oh, that's body horror. That's pretty gross to see. But they didn't really do that either. Like, they'll cut away, there'll be a splash of blood, but they won't really show anything. And had they shown it, that shock horror, that might have been something. But again, it wasn't scary, it wasn't funny, and it wasn't particularly gnarly or freaky, and so none of the movie worked for me in particular. I will say that I think if you're a huge Edward Scissorhands fan, this movie might work for you because it feels a lot like that. That's not a movie I particularly enjoy, so I'm not going to get much out of a movie that's a lot like it. As far as I said earlier, I gave this movie a positive for having the Tim Burton style. It did have the look, but it didn't have sort of the flair that he brings to his movies, which is why some of his movies may not work for me, and I may not be the biggest fan of his work, but I can still appreciate his work because he's got that certain flair that he does. This movie lacked the flair while it gave you the look, and it's just, again, that doesn't really work for me. So overall, I will say, like I said before, if you're a fan of Edward Scissorhands, or just if you're a fan of sort of coming-of-age movies, maybe, this movie might work better for you. But neither of those really work for me, and so I'm not going to recommend this movie to you. But those are just my opinions because that's my review for Lisa Frankenstein. Guys, if you've seen Lisa Frankenstein, you've got thoughts, you've got opinions, maybe you saw it and you agree or disagree with me, let me know any of that in the comment section down below. And finally, guys, if you enjoyed this video and you want to watch more, don't forget to hit the like button. It helps the video, it helps the channel, and it helps me right here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. All right, guys, we got to the end of my Lisa Frankenstein review, and I don't know if you know this, but I have a little subscribe box right there. You just click my face, and you can subscribe to the channel. I really greatly appreciate it. With that said, if you like this content and you want to watch more, well, I've got all of my horror movie reviews right there, and I've got all of my 2024 movie reviews right there.